The following series is meant as pure fan fiction, and in no way does it share the views of anyone else or those involved in this story. We will start this section of the series with a quick recap of 1995. 1994 was a tough year for Cobain. 1995 was also hard, but things were looking better on the upswing for Kurt. Kurt officially exits the rehab facility in March of 1995. He is now taking methadone every morning to wean himself off of heroin. This new lesser form of heroin, which will help addicts deal with the effects of withdrawal from heroin, is supplied by the Exodus Rehab Facility. Kurt decides he wants to move away from Seattle. He chooses a small town outside of LA. That way he can remain close to the facility that supplies him of his new drugs. He also feels more comfortable being closer to Frances Bean's new nanny, whose family resides in LA. Kurt would like to remain close to his daughter. He doesn't like the thought of putting her on airplanes every week. Courtney Love continues with her rants and claims about Cobain, even filing lawsuits against Frances Bean's nanny. Around the same time, Kurt begins to talk to Chris Novoselic more frequently, even getting together with Pat Smear. The three would get together and just talk. It wasn't about the music. Michael Stipe and Cobain would remain in contact with each other. Kurt would do an interview with Rolling Stone to clear the air about his name and his band. Dave Grohl's new project is starting to take shape, with people who have heard it giving it rave reviews. Nirvana fans unsure what to think about it, as it has not been released to the public yet. Cobain would neglect to shave his facial hair or cut his hair for the remainder of the year, sporting a new look that we've never seen in real life. He calls this his Jesus look. Kurt sees his daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, nearly every day. Courtney has been spending a lot of time with Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins. Kurt and Courtney are still officially married at the time, although Kurt would officially file for divorce around this time. Dave Grohl's solo project, Foo Fighters, releases to massive sales and acclaim. It is praised as being the new Nirvana, and to have picked up the ball and ran with it in the case of Nirvana's absence in 1994. It is recorded and performed solely by Grohl himself. By the end of the year, Dave would find himself forming a full band to play the songs live, enlisting none other than Nirvana's Pat Smear on guitar. Cobain would do a Spin magazine cover story in the summer and go on to tell fans they can expect another Nirvana album someday. He would also talk about Foo Fighters and say that he plans on changing Nirvana's style, and that Foo Fighters is what fans want Nirvana to be, but not what Kurt wants Nirvana to be. By the end of the year, Cobain is talking to Grohl again, and the two agreed that Dave should come back to the drum kit when the time comes. No word on the actual contents of the conversations they had, but it is said in the end they both agreed it was the right idea. A demo of You Know You're Right is leaked to the public. Geffen Records sees the potential sales and releases a 12-track compilation of Nirvana hits, with You Know You're Right being the title track of the album. The Greatest Hits album releases just in time for the holidays of 1995 to massive sales, giving Kurt a little bit of insight on what fans think about the band after a disastrous 1994 and 1995 for Nirvana. This brings us to 1996. January 1996. Courtney Love makes up with the nanny, taking care of Frances, in order to see her daughter during this time. She is also being civil towards Kurt, although it is widely known that Courtney is seeing Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins, and that the divorce is final. Mark Lanegan of Screaming Trees enters the Exodus Rehab Facility, thanks to help from Cobain. Kurt attends a New Year's Eve party on December 31st, 1995, in Los Angeles. At this party, Kurt Cobain meets Mike Patton and Beck separately. He chain smokes for most of the night, fighting the itch to drink alcohol or do some kind of drug to make him feel relaxed. He leaves without saying much to most of the people at the party. Kurt leaves before midnight, missing the New Year's countdown. He wanted to get home to his daughter. It's all he cared about. And it was easy to use her as a scapegoat, so he didn't have to do drugs. He used his daughter as his best excuse for not doing heroin. It went through his head daily. He still misses the fix from heroin. Methadone isn't doing it for him. It just knocks him out and makes him feel like a zombie. It's not the same. Kurt is happy to be off heroin, but he misses the way it made him feel. His sweat itches, and he smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day. His beard is unkempt. He hasn't seen or heard of a barber in his entire life. He looks as if he might live under an overpass, or in an alleyway somewhere. The only difference is that this is Kurt Cobain, and everyone knows how much he's worth and the things he's done and accomplished. Unfortunately, at this time, Cobain begins taking more Rohypnol to help himself sleep at night. It helps him get past his anxiety of not being able to sleep, and quote-unquote, knocks him out for a few hours. Kurt didn't see these things as drugs. The drug he knew was heroin. And he knew heroin is what he needed to stay away from. He is also well aware that he overdosed on Rohypnol back in March of 1994. But that was a different set of circumstances. He figured if he just takes one to go to sleep, he will be okay. It's not like he's partying and drinking champagne like last time. At this time, Kurt also believes in what Tom Grant told him about what Courtney said. Those Courtney tapes did not lie. What she said did not lie. Kurt has a weird feeling about the whole situation back in March to April 1994. Kurt also feels as if Courtney had more to do with Rome than he actually remembers. Maybe Courtney did want him dead because of the financial benefit she would have gained from it. Look where they are now, in the middle of a divorce. This is all going through Kurt's mind. He saw the financial gain that one song gave the band and himself. He knows that song would have came out anyway if he had died, and how much financial gain something like that would have been for Courtney. You Know You're Right isn't the only song. Kurt knows these things and thinks about them every day. It bothers him deeply. He believes Tom, but he can never admit that. On February 2nd, 1996, the divorce is final. Courtney gets the Lake Washington house, and custody of Frances Bean is split between Love and Cobain. Courtney gets nothing from Nirvana. In the case of Cobain's death from this point forward, Cobain's estate would go entirely to his daughter Frances. Cobain would say he feels like he's out of his mind, or that he quote-unquote lost a piece of his brain somewhere along the way. In February of 1996, Kurt would begin to paint more. These new paintings would be more abstract and surreal than his regular work. Cobain begins to paint the entire walls of his house with murals of his own. The following weeks would consist of constant rehearsal. Kurt wants to get some form of band back in shape. So they basically relearn how to play all the old hits they always played live. But mostly, they would just screw around and laugh and reminisce about past experiences they had when they were quote-unquote happy. They would flesh out some new material Kurt has worked on while in rehab throughout 1994. There was also some old stuff being reworked that Cobain had written in 1993 and 1994 that hadn't been used. Some of these songs we know in our real timeline as Desire, Do Re Mi, and the Yodel song. Some of these songs will come to have different names later on when they are released. A lot of these quote-unquote new Songs consist of Kurt playing acoustic guitar with Pat providing backing electric guitars. Kurt just wanted to sit down and chill out. Chris would say, "We get to Kurt's place, and he opens the door very slowly, and it had this loud creaking sound. And you look in, and Kurt's there looking like he hasn't slept in days with this huge, scraggly beard, and you're like, dude, who the hell are you? What are you doing?" Cobain insisted on playing his acoustic guitar over Pat's electric guitar. This creates a dynamic that completely changes the sound of the band. It's a lot more calm and collected and focuses on melody rather than the screeching guitars. The music is still hard, especially with Dave Grohl on the drums, but it is clear that the band has evolved its sound. It didn't even feel like it was about the music sometimes. The rest of the band was honestly just happy to see Kurt alive. Although, in this timeline, they don't think about it like that, because Kurt didn't die in this timeline. Therefore, the rest of the band doesn't know what it's like to actually lose him. In this timeline, they simply just get more time and memories with Kurt Cobain. Kurt at this time is still talking with Michael Stipe and working out some material ideas. Kurt suggests they ask Laurie Goldston to join Nirvana on the cello full-time as an official member of the band. The guys have a laugh, but nobody objected to the idea. March 1996. Dave Grohl has found massive success with his band Foo Fighters. It peaked at #1 on the Billboard 200, beating Nirvana's self-titled compilation album by a few thousand buys. In this timeline, the view on Foo Fighters is different. If Kurt is dead, Foo Fighters was initially looked at as the backup option when they first came out, like it was there to fill some kind of void. Now it's not like that at all. People hear it for what it really is. Really well done music. Some can argue it might even be better than Kurt's. But who's comparing? It's two completely different spectrums, especially now that Nirvana's sound is changing, making way for Foo Fighters to take the old crown Nirvana once wore. Now, it's hard to say whether Dave will continue playing drums for Nirvana full-time, or if now is his time to go off and do his own thing. It's not like he's taking a huge risk. He's already proven how well the album has sold and the mark it's making. Kurt, on the other hand, is weary of Dave's new band. He didn't really like it. He would never come to admit that to anyone, but it's well known that Kurt couldn't understand why Dave didn't just call him, and they could have written songs together. Kurt liked the idea of having Dave help write songs sometimes, but not all the time. Kurt was known for just having his own stuff ready to go when he walked in the door, and the rest of the band would basically play along and a song would form. Kurt was always the sole songwriter in the band. It didn't seem right to him to have songs fully written by someone else in the band. But at the same time, he felt like if Dave wrote songs in Nirvana, it would take a lot of pressure off of Kurt, which he loved the idea of, and that's why he elected to talk things out with Dave at the end of 1995. Hearing Dave's songs and how good they were made Kurt question his own talents, wondering why a guy like Dave is sitting on the drums when he could be out making these beautiful songs with his own band. Kurt is also having doubts about Chris Novoselic. Back in 1994, they had a huge fight and Kurt wanted him out of the band. Both parties would reconcile in 1995, but seeing Chris and Dave in person and spending time with them made Kurt start to think about old memories. A lot of bad memories from when he was on heroin. Kurt feels guilty and resentful. He doesn't like the feeling, and he doesn't like being around anything that makes him feel that way. But he is trying for the sake of the effect his addiction had on everyone around him. He feels obligated to correct his wrongs. Where does this leave Pat Smear? Do all four members of Nirvana stay together? Or does Foo Fighters go off on their own tour and leave Nirvana behind? These are all questions going through everyone in the band's minds. What's next for Nirvana? They've made it this far through all the shit they've been through since Dave joined the band back in 1990. What really is next? Kurt came a long way from March of 1994, where we started this story. In this timeline, Kurt may be alive, but it's not exactly a perfect life. There has been a lot of hard times, and many, many more to come. The main thing you need to remember is that Kurt has his daughter, and Frances Bean is growing up with her father. Through April of 1996, Nirvana played some small gigs at private clubs around LA to quote-unquote shake the rust off, Novoselic would say. These places would only fit about 50 to 60 people in capacity, and Nirvana was never advertised or mentioned playing in these venues. These private, unknown shows would see a massive number of bootleg VHS and CD cassette releases for the next few years after they were performed. 2 years ago at this time, Kurt would be dead in real life, but now, in this timeline, it's looking more like Kurt is gearing up to make one more album. His Geffen Records contract will end and negotiations are able to begin after one more album, due to MTV Unplugged and Nirvana compilation album, and the soon-to-be-released From the Muddy Banks of the Wishkah, a recording contract has one more album from Nirvana. And the band intends to make that album in 1996, hoping for a late 1996 release. The only issue for Kurt is that the label is asking Nirvana for an immediate tour for the album after its release. Kurt absolutely hates this idea and doesn't feel like he's ready to go out on a full-scale tour due to his quote-unquote condition. The reason for this tour is because the remainder of shows from the In Utero tour that Kurt canceled back in early 1994 were not canceled, but postponed. Nirvana would have to go back to these cities in Europe and fulfill the previous dates that were postponed. This potential tour of Europe in 1997 would fulfill those dates, depending on how the album sells. Kurt considers the postponement of the dates a bad move by management, and puts Kurt in a bad place he doesn't want to be. He would rather take the loss financially by canceling the dates rather than postponing them. He has no intentions on going to Europe anytime soon, and he intends to let his management company know. Courtney Love is spotted with Evan Dando, even though she is supposedly dating Billy Corgan. Hole becomes a band again, and Eric Erlandson begins jamming with Courtney Love at the Lake Washington home. Courtney has a lot of Kurt's old tapes. Tapes he recorded when he was home on heroin, playing his acoustic guitar. A lot of stuff he doesn't remember. They were all left behind in the divorce when Kurt moved to the town outside of LA. Kurt is having some short-term memory problems, presumably from various different drug problems he is having. So having those tapes would be essential to the recording process of this new album he plans on releasing. Since Hall is back to being a band again after Courtney's 1994 overdose and Kristen's 1994 death, Kurt is worried that she may be stealing ideas from some of his tapes. She also has his journals and a lot of his notes and writings. None of this stuff would be as public as it is in our real timeline. In this timeline, Kurt isn't seen in the same light as we see him now. No need to release his journals to the world at this moment. May 1996. From the Muddy Banks of the Wishkah, a live compilation of the band with performances ranging from the years 1989 to 1994. Most of the songs are from 1991 to 1993, with select few being from the Bleach era and one song from 1994. The album debuted at number 8 on Billboard 200 and peaked at number 7. It would gather mixed reviews, with some saying Nirvana didn't give a damn on stage, and it shows. Some songs from the In Utero tour of 1993 and 1994, like Heart-Shaped Box and Scentless Apprentice, sounds like the band quote-unquote didn't give a shit about what they were doing, especially Cobain. Kurt had no involvement in the song selection. The album was to be compiled by Chris and Dave, but Dave rarely showed up in the studio, as he was working on his own projects. So Chris Novoselic chose most of the tracks to use for the album himself, with some help from a couple different unknown producers. Foo Fighters' debut album would remain at the top of the chart for the next few weeks. Hype for the album would die down as Dave and crew haven't really played many shows or done any media. Cobain wants to start work on the fabled new Nirvana album. The album doesn't have a title or a concept. Nobody ever thought this album would actually get made. Along the way, Dave stuck with Kurt and just dealt with whatever animosity they had towards each other for the time being. Chris stayed silent. It seemed as if he was feeling some of the same feelings Kurt was feeling towards him. Chris knew he talked a lot and it was bothering Kurt for whatever reason, so for some time he came to practices and didn't say much. Something was really off with this band. The general feeling between members of Nirvana is that getting the band back together was a great idea at the start, and then reality set in, and everyone remembered who they were and what they've been through. Old feelings and animosity resurface, and the thought of being a full-time record company cash cow brought back some resentment towards the band, especially for Kurt. And now Dave, whose solo project has become a massive success over the last few months. At this time, Kurt is deep into the Rohypnol and downer medication. It's noticeable that he's not entirely clean. He may be off heroin, and that is well known, but Kurt is still getting his fix on other things. After a lot of thought, Dave agrees to put Foo Fighters on hold in order to record the Nirvana album on drums. But throughout May, he plays a string of gigs around the coast with Foo Fighters. After a number of visits from Kurt Cobain, Mark Lanegan exits the rehab facility and goes back to Seattle, where he continues projects and claims to be, quote-unquote, free of the heroin grasp. Recording of the new Nirvana album will start in June of 1996. The recording is expected to take 6 weeks to record. The label is hoping for a late 1996 release, just before the holidays. Dave Grohl isn't sure what to think about the immediate tour after recording the album, and neither is Kurt. They don't want to go on a full-scale tour so soon, if at all. But Nirvana does need to fulfill those postponed dates and make up for lost time and money. Dave wants to continue with his own band after recording the new Nirvana album. He isn't sure what to do. Pat Smear is deciding what to do, but ultimately decided at this point in time that he would stick with Kurt. He would be quoted as saying, "Kurt was the one who brought me into all of this, and I've been with him the whole time, since the 1994 shit up until now. I wouldn't leave. Kurt's my soulmate." Pat Smear would go on about Cobain and Nirvana. Dave's got his own thing and it's fucking awesome and everyone loves it, and it's like, Dave's going to be okay. He's got nothing to worry about. He's going to go off and sell millions of records. I feel like I just want to be there for Kurt. It's nothing against Dave. Pat Smear would have songwriting credits on the upcoming Nirvana album as well. In June of 1996, recording for the new album begins at the Paramount recording studio, with no title for the album, no concept, and a handful of songs picked out of the new and old Nirvana catalog. These would consist of Talk to Me, a song originally written by Cobain sometime in 1991. IV League, written sometime in late 1993, as well as a few throwaway jams that will surely be bootlegged later on. Cobain didn't have an acoustic setup at this studio, so the songs feature more of a hard tone this time around. It wouldn't be until weeks later where Nirvana would record songs with acoustic rhythm guitars. This time the band would record in Cobain's brand new private studio that he had worked on since moving into his home outside of LA last year. He was keeping it a secret. When arriving, Cobain greeted everyone with cigarettes and lemonade. He was clean-shaven. The grizzly beard was finally gone. He also had short hair now, a completely different look for Kurt that we have never seen. Pat would later say about the switch between studios. The environment was just better. We tried a big-time studio over at Paramount, but it felt too big. We didn't want to sound like a big rock band. Moving to Kurt's studio made us feel more grounded. It's literally the size of a living room. The only issue being, Dave had to bring an entire drum set and have it fully mic'd for recording. But Dave enjoyed doing that. It didn't seem like much of an issue. Pat Smear would overlay all the guitar tracks with signature fuzzbox Nirvana-style guitars. The songs in this session would consist of some older songs from sometime in 1991 to 1992. Poison's Gone and Do Re Mi, written in 1994, and Desire, written sometime in 1990 to 1991, presumably. Dave Grohl would lay down the drum tracks for the album, but would still be feeling some kind of resentment towards the band due to the fact that his new band is such a hit and he's not out on the road pursuing that. Nirvana would return in July to record more songs, including And I Love Her, the Beatles cover, and a song titled Ruin Life, originally titled The Yodel Song, written sometime between 1989 and 1994. It is unknown. There's a new song that we haven't heard called Escitalopram, which is unknown when this song was written. Kurt retained some of his old tapes, but not the ones he really wanted. He remembers some of it and is trying his best to rehash those loose memories of riffs into new songs he can use. Some of the songs on these tapes that Courtney has, we may know in our real timeline. These songs include What More Can I Say and Burn My Britches, among a few others. Major parts of Do Re Mi are lost in the tapes, including the March 30th recording in the Lake Washington basement with Pat Smear and Eric Erlandson. Courtney holds possession of these tapes. Laurie Goldston would provide cello on And I Love Her, which now serves as the new Something in the Way type song. The song is a lot slower and brooding than the original Beatles version. Cobain would go on to say that he chose this song as a tribute to Frances Bean Cobain and not Courtney Love. The band would record The Man Who Sold the World in studio for the first time. It will be used as a B-side or on a compilation album later on. July 1996. Cobain, being unhappy with the album's sound and song selection, starts complaining and being hard to work with, threatening to stop the entire album from being made. It wasn't until Michael Stipe would arrive in the studio to mess around with Kurt and the band that Kurt would calm down and continue recording. When asked about what the new Nirvana album sounds like, Stipe would say, really magical stuff. Very much Kurt Cobain on this record. It's clear that Kurt is saving his work with Michael Stipe for a later time, not to be used with Nirvana. Maybe a solo album down the road, but it's hard to say right now. It's not clear what Cobain's true musical intentions are at this moment. Dave would suggest that Nirvana record Nobody Knows I'm New Wave, a song loosely written sometime in 1992 while Nirvana was in the height of its popularity. The rest of the band would elect to record this song with full electric guitars in classic Nirvana style. Cobain would agree. All the songs recorded by this new revived Nirvana so far would consist of Nobody Knows I'm New Wave, Do Re Mi, Poison's Gone, Talk to Me, Desire, Ruin Life, Sappy, Opinion, Old Age, Escitalopram, Ivy League, and I Love Her, The Man Who Sold the World, Burn the Rain, Moist Vagina, Best Friend's Girl, Cars cover. It's not clear which, if any, of these songs will make it onto this so-called album Nirvana is working on. One or two songs may be added, possibly some new songs written in 1995 and 1996. August 1996. Cobain is still not happy with the track listing. Thinking he should have spent more time writing newer material, he still wants to record the material he came up with Michael Stipe. Thinking about ending Nirvana altogether and going off to do his own thing. Besides, Dave Grohl has a new band now. There's a weird tension in the studio that shouldn't be there between Dave and Kurt, and everyone knowing that the tension is there. Kurt just wants to get the album done to please the record label at this point, knowing that this album is his final obligation to Geffen Records. He has yet to negotiate a new deal, with many believing that he won't, and has no intentions on signing any kind of deal with any label. At this point in his life, Kurt doesn't want to tour. He doesn't want to be the big rock star. The idea was nice in the beginning, especially after the divorce. Now he just wants to be at home with his daughter and raise her like a good father. He doesn't want to be on the road all the time, but he knows he has to finish what he started before he can move on, thanks to, quote-unquote, bad creative decision-making by management. Cobain expresses to Pat Smear that he wishes Dave would have just went off and done his own thing, and that he's not happy with the direction the band is going now that Foo Fighters is seen as such a success. Kurt feels as if he would have just done his own solo project or maybe found some new members to be in Nirvana. Kurt isn't happy with the way the band is sounding and progressing. He feels the resentment towards Chris and Dave, and the resentment they have back towards him. Like we previously stated before, Chris and Dave don't lose Kurt in this timeline. They don't know what it feels like to lose him. So he is regarded in a different light. Chris and Dave are still mad at Kurt for all the shit he put them through, and then the feeling that Kurt came back out of nowhere to get the band back together and make a new album. He's only doing this album to please the record label and get out of his contract. At this time, Kurt is falling deep into the Rohypnol. A few recording sessions saw Kurt not even present, falling back into his old ways of showing up when he wants, reminiscent of early 1994. This gives the rest of the band bad vibes, especially Chris Novoselic, who just wants to get back in the saddle and make some great timeless hit songs like they used to. September 1996. With the drum tracks basically finished for the songs that were selected, Dave Grohl decides he's tired of waiting around and proceeds with his band Foo Fighters. He decides it's time to take the band on the road, and by the end of September of 1996, Foo Fighters embarks on his first tour. They will travel across the United States for 3 months before heading to Europe in the new year. This news sends Kurt into a frenzy, and he ultimately fires Dave Grohl from Nirvana, leaving the band with no drummer for the time being. Kurt now has two choices: replace Dave Grohl and have the drum tracks redone for the new album, or keep the tracks that were recorded and simply give Dave Grohl recording credits and find a new drummer if he wishes to continue onto the tour wished upon by Nirvana's management. Kurt decides to scrap the entire album and start fresh. In doing so, angers Chris Novoselic, who believes Kurt and Dave should just quote-unquote talk it out. A huge argument ensues between Kurt and Chris, and it is decided at that point in time that Chris Novoselic will also leave the band until Kurt can get his head straight and figure out what's going to happen with the band. Nirvana's management is not happy at this time. October 12th, 1996. Cobain is found unconscious by Frances Bean's nanny. He is rushed to the hospital of an apparent overdose of Rohypnol and other painkiller medication. Fortunately, Kurt lives through this overdose. More widespread rumors of his death are circulated through the media. Nirvana management makes a statement saying Kurt is in good health and that it was an accident. No word on the status of the band at this time. Dave Grohl is noted as saying, "Just tired of hearing about Kurt die. It's time to do my own thing. I love Kurt and I want him to be okay, but I have to go get my mind set on my own stuff right now." Novoselic and Pat Smear do not comment at this time. November 1996. After recovering from his recent accidental overdose, immense pressure from the record label to get the ball rolling is taking its toll on Kurt. He agrees to meet with Nirvana management, and reluctantly agrees to release the work that has been recorded by the band back in June to August of 1996. In an interview with Danny Goldberg years later, he would say, "We had to sell something, and they had unfinished work that we could sell. Even unfinished, it would hit number one. It was that good." Cobain is in no way happy about the release of this upcoming album. It is not finished. In a total Cobain move, he names the band's new album Rohypnol, a tongue-in-cheek take on Cobain's health problems and recent overdose. The album's cover would be an original composition painting by Cobain himself. It depicts a mouth swallowing a flow of pills, with the Nirvana logo stamped onto the image as if it's been branded and stamped for approval to market and to quote-unquote suck money from the teat of the cash cow. This album would still feature Dave Grohl on drums, Chris Novoselic on bass, and Pat Smear on guitars, none of which have been officially part of the band since Cobain decided to pull the plug back in October. Kurt would go on to say this album will be the end of Nirvana as you know it, and was created solely to please the big cheese. At this point in the timeline, Dave Grohl is done with Nirvana, never to return. His career trajectory will be the same as we know it is in real life. He doesn't talk about Kurt or Nirvana in interviews. Foo Fighters is as big as Nirvana was circa 1994. Kurt always had some type of issue with Dave, even as far back as 1991. Leaving to go on tour with his new band in the middle of recording was the icing on the cake for Kurt. Chris Novoselic also does not return to the band in any type of official capacity. He goes off and forms Sweet 75, just as he does in the real timeline. Pat Smear would then joined Foo Fighters as an official member. Nirvana's Rohypnol is slated to release on December 25th, 1996. The raw versions of the songs are mixed and mastered, but leaving Cobain's acoustics raw and ear-piercing. The album gives off an in utero mixed with unplugged feel. It's heavy and raw, but also melodic and very down to earth. Not overly produced like Nevermind, but not as raw as in utero. A nice middle ground with the echo of an acoustic guitar overlay. The album is unfinished, but that's what makes it what it is. It sounds as if it was recorded in a dark basement with a group of guys at the end of their rope. It's very much a Kurt Cobain album. Almost like it took every album Nirvana ever made, including Unplugged, and mixed them together. This is what quitting drugs sounds like, Cobain said upon its initial release. But it was no secret Kurt fully wasn't off drugs. That part of him would prove to be the hardest to kick. No matter what he did, he needed a fix. No music videos will be made for this album, and a handful of singles will be released. To casual listeners who don't read tabloids or watch MTV, would think that Nirvana is alive and well by listening to this album. It sounds as if the band picked up where they left off in 1994. But to the people involved, that was far from the case. The official track listing for Rohypnol is as follows. Nobody Knows I'm New Wave. Do Re Mi. Poison's Gone. Talk to Me. Desire. Ruin Life. Escitalopram, Ivy League, and I Love Her. B-sides from the album that will be chosen as B-sides on singles later on would be Burn the Rain, The Man Who Sold the World, and Best Friend's Girl. It is now the end of 1996. Kurt Cobain is alive. He's on methadone. He's addicted to Rohypnol and different downer medications, and he has overdosed once again. He can't remember some of his previous musical projects due to memory loss. Nirvana is officially split up. Kurt Cobain is the only member of Nirvana. It is unclear if he will continue the band with new members, or if he will pursue his own solo ventures, or if he will retire from music entirely. Kurt frequently remains in contact with Michael Stipe and Mark Lanegan. Buzz Osborne begins to contact Kurt more now that, quote-unquote, the witch is finally gone. Kurt spends New Year's Eve at home with no guests. He puts Frances Bean to bed himself. He likes being there with her, away from Seattle. Courtney still has joint custody and sees Frances every week. Although Kurt and Courtney never do the meetings, they haven't seen each other in 2 years. This will conclude If Kurt Cobain Lived, 1996. We hope you enjoyed listening, and please stay tuned for If Kurt Cobain Lived, 1997. What do you think it would be like if Kurt Cobain didn't die in 1994? Please share your thoughts, comment, like, and subscribe. And thank you for watching.